Hello, I'm Whalley, welcome to Lenscraft. Today I'm looking at the newly released Luminar 4. I'm already a Luminar user and I'll be using version 3.1.3 to make my comparisons. The version of Luminar 4 that I'm using is a pre-release trial version, so it could change by the time you watch this video. For the comparison, I'm going to be using Luminar in the standalone mode. This is important because you can also use Luminar as a plugin for the likes of Lightroom and Photoshop. But as I'm using it in standalone mode, it doesn't need any of the software. The areas I'll be looking at in this review are: firstly, are there any speed improvements? Next, it's the turn of the interface changes. After that, I'll look at some of the filter changes, and finally, I'll give you my view on whether or not I think the upgrade is worthwhile. To consider the speed of Luminar, I'm using a simple import test. I have 702 raw files from my Fuji X-T3 in a folder, and I'm going to add these to both versions of Luminar. The computer I'm using for this is a 3-year-old i7 iMac with 32GB of RAM, and I'm running on the Catalina operating system. The images for this test are on an external drive connected by a USB 3 port, and the Luminar catalogue is also on the same drive. This will almost certainly slow the performance of the software, so let's see how it copes. Now, rather than keep you watching a progress bar, I did the imports earlier. It took 12 minutes and 55 seconds for Luminar 3 to complete this import. When I repeated the test with Luminar 4, it took 11 minutes and 5 seconds. That's around a 15% reduction in the import time. But there's a little bit more to it than just importing. Overall, my subjective impression of the software is that Luminar 4 is a little bit more responsive during general use. That said, I still think there's further work to do on the performance if you're editing large volumes of work. The images sometimes feel a little bit clunky, but again that could be because I'm running with an external drive. Now let's consider the interface. The interface has gone through something of a transformation in this latest version. On first impressions, looking over the screens, it feels a lot cleaner and less cluttered. But the problem with a change of this sort to the interface is, firstly, it makes it very difficult to do a direct comparison between the old version and the new. Secondly, it also makes it very difficult to find some of the features that you may normally use in the old version. When you initially open Luminar in the library module, there aren't many immediate changes. The only difference really is the arrangement of the toolbar along the top of the screen. It's only when we get to the single image view that we start to see some changes. The most obvious difference here is the looks in Luminar 4, which now takes centre stage along the bottom of the screen. The looks are presets that you can apply to your image just by clicking. You can then control the strength of this overall adjustment using the slider for the selected look. Initially, I thought this was new, but thought it can't be because I do remember seeing something similar in Luminar 3. Again, I've got the same image. I'll switch to the single view mode, and then I'll check the view menu. Here, I've got the option to show the looks panel. And we have the same looks available. Having checked the looks panel in both versions of the software, I was able to see that most of the looks are the same, although there are some changes. I also noticed that having applied the looks, the settings show up differently in the two versions of Luminar. If I go to the edit panel, you'll see what I mean. Here, in Luminar 3, we see only those filters used to create the look. In version 4, if I go to the edit menu, what you see are all the adjustments, but the ones that are highlighted in white are the ones where there's an adjustment applied. We'll be looking at a few of these filters in a little more detail shortly. The other change I noticed was that the tools drop down in the toolbar has gone, but now we've got a crop tool. If I show you Luminar 3, we have a tools drop down where we've got the crop, free transform, clone and stamp, and erase tools. These are all really important tools for most people. I eventually found them in Luminar 4, but they're not in the menu. And if you look at the editing panel, it now looks quite different to how it looked in Luminar 3. We now have a series of icons down the right hand side of the screen. At the top, we have the layers option that allows us to manage our layers. We then have canvas, and this is the new home for the missing tools. You can see here we've got crop and rotate, erase and clone and stamp. But there's another option that I haven't seen before, which is the lens and geometry tool. It could be that I've missed this in the previous version because I haven't seen it listed as a new tool for Luminar 4. It may also be that because I'm using a pre-release version of the software, it may not make it into the final release. What I can say is that it makes an excellent job of correcting the lens distortion, and it gives you good control. If I now look further down on the right of this panel, we can see the different workspaces with all the filters arranged in them. Now, in the previous version of Luminar, you would use the drop down at the top of the edit panel to select the workspaces you wanted to use. I'll just give you a refresher of how you did that. This would then limit the list of filters you could adjust, although you could add further filters. It also had the unfortunate effect of clearing any Luminar look you may already have applied. As you can see, it's gone from this image. In Luminar 4, we don't see this annoying behaviour. All the filters are visible, and we can now make changes without affecting the rest of the image. I also noticed that the history option that used to be at the top of the histogram has now appeared at the bottom, so rather than being up here, we now have the history panel here. Overall, I find the new interface a lot cleaner and easier to work with. In comparison, the old interface now appears cluttered and confusing. Let's now look more closely at some of the filters. The first thing that I noticed is that in Luminar 3 we had 51 filters. But in Luminar 4 we've only got 29 filters. I won't do a direct comparison of which filters are missing because it's not quite that simple, as you'll see. My advice is that if you're a Luminar 3 user, download the trial version and check for any filters that you think are essential. And remember, if something is missing, it may have been combined with another filter. Let's take the example of the sharpening filter. In Luminar 3, the sharpening filter had controls for the amount, the radius, but also masking and dehalo to control the effect. If we now look at Luminar 4, we don't even have a sharpening filter. Instead, the sharpening filter is combined with the detail enhancement filter. And in this new filter, all you see is a sharpening slider to control the amount of sharpening in the image. If you want to control the radius, you need to select the advanced settings. Now you have access to a sharpening radius and a sharpening masking option, but there's no dehalo control. Many of the filters in Luminar 4 now have this advanced settings section should you need it. This has helped to simplify the photo editing in Luminar 4 so less experienced users don't become confused. Initially, I was a little surprised and worried by this lack of control, but after trying the filters out with quite a few images, I'm something of a convert. The controls are much easier to use and the results are very good indeed. You only need to dive into the advanced section of the filter if you find there's a problem. The other thing that I've noticed in Luminar 4 was that it appears to be processing the image with better quality. If I zoom into this image at 600%, the image is smooth and clean. The level of detail is also really impressive. Let me show you the same in Luminar 3. Whilst the image is still good, it's not quite as clean as it was with Luminar 4. When I drop back to 200% magnification, the image appears really sharp and full of detail, but it's still very natural. Now, I don't think this improvement is just down to sharpening and noise reduction. I think it's down to the improvements in the artificial intelligence of the other filters. Skylum has made a big thing about their AI improvements, and from the results I'm seeing, I think it's working. Now, one new filter that I'm really keen to try as a landscape photographer is the sky replacement filter, which is completely new in Luminar 4. Here I've got a snapshot image open where the sky's blown out. You'll find the new sky replacement filter in the creative panel in the edit options. Here you can see the AI sky filter replacement. What makes this feature so impressive is that you don't need to bother selecting the area to be replaced. The artificial intelligence in the filter will select the sky area for you. All you need to do is select the sky that you want to replace it with. Once you find a sky that's a good replacement, you can also fix another common problem. Often the lighting conditions with the new sky and the original image don't match, but using the new Relight Scene slider you can try to blend the two more realistically. Whilst the software comes with some useful sky images, you also have the option to use your own. Now, although I don't have a catalogue of sky images that would be useful with this at the moment, they are something that you can collect over time. For this particular image though, I had the camera in bracketing mode, so I have got an image I created from one of the other exposures, and I'll import that now. Now, I will stress this isn't the way to try to blend multiple exposures together in Luminar. There's a better option for that, but it will demonstrate that we can replace the sky. At the moment the two images don't align properly. You can see that we've got the original land here and the new image here, which seems to have been centered in the sky area. You can reposition it using this horizontal position slider. Now the two images are aligned. You'll notice that there were some options here that didn't quite blend properly, and you can adjust those again using this Sky Global filter. Now we've replaced one sky with another, and we've got the Relight Scene option just to try to help balance the two together. If I zoom into 100% magnification, we can check what a good selection the software's created. Here you can see the selection area between the two is quite good, but it's not quite perfect at the moment. Having said that, if you're not an experienced image editor, you may not know how to do such a sky replacement cleanly yourself, and this seems to be a far better option. Despite my being impressed, I am finding the results from this filter a little bit hit and miss when used over a wide range of images. When it works, it's very impressive, and it does have huge potential for the future. I do hope that Skylum invests further efforts in trying to develop this. Now, one area that I haven't covered in this review are the new AI portrait enhancement tools. You'll find them here. You can see there's an AI skin enhancer, a portrait enhancer, and a couple other filters that you would have found in the previous version. As with the other AI filters, they're quite impressive with what you can achieve. If you photograph fashion or portraits, I'd urge you to download the trial version of the software to check if these will work for you. As for me, I'll be upgrading to the latest version. I think the cost is reasonable, and that the team at Skylum has made some significant improvements to the software and processing quality. I also find that the new interface is much easier to work with, and I do prefer it. I'm Whalley, you've been watching Lenscraft. I'll see you soon for another video.